Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be watching this from. I uploaded a video yesterday of a lady, or several videos, of a lady who showed up out in this area where I live. So if you want to know anything about what I'm talking about, you need to go back and look at I believe it was 4 videos that I uploaded on Brandy, a homeless lady who moved out in this area. So let me give you a little background information. Out of respect to those of you that have found this channel, I decided to give some explanation about why I haven't been uploading videos. And a little bit about why I've been uploading them. I moved out in the area where I'm living now about 3 years ago, 4 years ago maybe 3 years ago. And I moved from a different part of town. I lived in the south part of the town where I lived. Where I moved was considered and called Midtown. And I moved out into this area simply because where I was living for 36 years, the rent had gone up to the point I could no longer afford to live there. So I ended up in this part of town. And it wasn't until I moved out here that I began to see things that I'd never seen before. Unbeknownst to me, where I moved at the time seemed like a wonderful situation for me. I moved from a place where I was paying about $1,000 a month into this place where I only had to pay $700 a month, all utilities included. And the bonus was that right across the street was a grocery store. So living on Social Security, where at this point my income is only like $11.55 a month, it was a bonus for me to have a grocery store right across the street. This particular store out in this area was built back in probably 1950. The building I lived in was built in 1955. And the grocery store was the smallest and the oldest grocery store in the town. It was also a huge magnet for the homeless. So if you go back and watch some of the videos, I began to see things out here that I have never seen in my life. Now, it's one thing to read about the homeless. It's one thing to drive by an encampment, walk by somebody who's homeless, walk by somebody standing in the front of the store begging for money. It's another thing to have it right outside your front door. And so for 3 years, I witnessed things I have never seen before. But this store here was pretty much the social gathering for the homeless. And it attracted the homeless for several things. Number one, there was a lot of space at the back of the store and around the side of the stores where they could hang out all day, beg for money, or they would sit on a ramp, a ledge on a ramp that went down to the back of the store where the trucks would come in every night to unload the groceries for the store. They would always vanish at night. They never stayed around at night. They never put up any tents. They just were here all day long. But they were here because they had a store that sold alcohol. They also had the store where they could go in and steal stuff. But it was also a place that many of the people that lived out here were generous and kind to the homeless, gave them food, gave them beverages and water. In April, the store announced that they were closing. The store said the reason they were closing was because they just weren't making enough revenue. And it was a very small store. They didn't have a lot of traffic, but those of us who live out here know exactly what was going on. We knew that more than likely it was closing because of the homeless. Because of the homeless, there was constant trash around the building. All night long, cars would drive by, blaring loud music. They would congregate at the back and the sides of the store all day long. They would go into the store and steal. I've been to every store in this town, grocery store. They had the highest presence of security at this store. They had security in the front of the store. They had security walking through the store. They had a constant security force that patrolled the perimeter of the building every hour to 2 hours and running them off. They'd run them off. Many of them would leave, but for the most part, they would never leave. They'd hang out here all night long. They would play blaring music. There was a lot of screaming and yelling. I've never heard anything like this before. I have never heard people walking around screaming and yelling at each other. One of the big things you would hear is people screaming at each other, saying, "You stole this from me, you stole this from me." A lot of swearing, a lot of screaming at each other. I saw a man physically beat a woman up. I saw them urinate on the sidewalk. One time there was a man who was in the front of the store, a building here. I don't know where he came from. There was a hotel next door, and he was pacing back and forth in front of the hotel, screaming and yelling on the phone and swearing. I couldn't understand anything he said. Where he came from, I don't know. There was all sorts of things. There were mentally ill people generally at night who would be screaming and yelling. At night they would come over here to the building and stand outside the door of this building trying to get in. You could hear them pulling on the door and trying to get in. We have a 2 security fob system to the building. They have security cameras all around the outside of the building, inside the building. There would be cars that would come and park across the street, just sit there, and then other cars would drive up and park behind them, and they'd go over and talk to them and exchange something. You know what that was. And then the person would get in the car and leave. When I first moved out here, there was a guy on a bicycle that would drive around He had a boom box on the back of his bicycle, and he would drive through this area off and on all day and at night, blaring music on a boom box on the back of the bicycle. And when I asked them what that was about, they told me he was the drug dealer. I would see them, the ramp at the back of the store was a big place for them to go down and go to the bathroom. So during the daytime, there were no trucks there, and they would go down to the end of the ramp, go to the bathroom. They would also congregate at the bottom of the ramp and pass out. So anybody who got drugs, they would pass it out, and they'd have a little party down there at the end of the ramp. Because at night, there were no trucks down there. The big draw to the store was there was a place for them to sit. So there were some stairs at the side of the building where they could sit. There was a ledge at the back of the building where the trucks would, and they'd sit along the ledge. You've seen them lined up along the ledge. If you go back and look at my videos, there are many videos of them just sitting on the ledge. This would happen throughout the day and at night. If you walked around the side of the building, there were some more stairs that they would just sit on. And then, of course, they would hang out at the front of the building. There wasn't a time in the 3 years that I came here that I would not go into the store that some homeless person wasn't being caught. I would see security walking really quickly up to somebody, telling them to open their coat, open their bag, dump out what they stole. They'd immediately take a picture of them and tell them to leave and not come back. And then there would be 2 or 3 security guards that would march them out, screaming behind them, "Thief, thief, don't come back," all the way out the store. It didn't prevent them from not coming back. They kept coming back. This was an area of town that you didn't go outside when it got dark. It wasn't safe because of the mentally ill, because of the homeless, because of the drug activity going on. For the first 2 years I was here, there was a man that would park his car in the empty parking lot across from the store. And he'd sit there all day, throughout the night. And people would drive up, get out and talk to him at the window. They would exchange something, and then the person would leave. Another time, for quite some time, for about a year, a lady, different women would be with this man. I never saw the man. He never got out of the car or whoever was driving, and there would always be a woman who would stand by the side of the car. Different women. Somebody come up, talk to her, and she'd get in the car and drive off. So you know what that was about. So there was prostitution, there was drugs, there were the mentally ill, there was the trash, there was the stealing. I would see them exchanging bottles of alcohol and drinking it. The security out here was very active and very proactive in constantly running them off. But it was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week thing. During the nighttime, they had security who would drive around the building. If they caught them, they ran them off. But they were here all the time. And on top of that, for the first time in my life, I was living in an area where at night I would hear gunshots. I'd never heard that before. And in several occasions, I would get up, and although they would vacate at night, they would not, in the wintertime, they would vanish. They never put up any tents. There were a few times that I would get up, and there would be somebody laying on the ground, and I would later find out they had passed away during the night. So for those of us who lived out here, we knew what was really going on. They were closing the store because the homeless were just rampant. So they announced that the store would be closing on May the 9th. When I got up on May the 10th, the fence that you saw in the previous videos with Brandy was around the whole perimeter of the building. So when I got up at 7 o'clock in the morning, that fence was up. I had gone over there on the 9th, and there was pretty much nothing there. All the shelves were empty. They had a few things on the checkout stand. They had removed the cash machine for Global Credit Union was gone. The deli was closed. The pharmacy was closed. They had a few shelves in the front that had a few things on them, but there was nothing there. On the 10th of May, the fence had gone up around the property. There was a crane outside, and they boarded up all the windows. Then about a week later, they put in a new security camera in the back. And for about 2 weeks, it would constantly announce, this is the security for the building to protect the customers and the employees. Of course, it's closed. And then throughout the night, there would be announcements. You'd hear, you have come too close to the perimeter of the property. Announce who you are. And I would go over and look, and there was nobody there. And that went on for several weeks, and then about 2 nights ago, the announcements quit. But I did see security guards patrolling the inside the perimeter of the fence. The homeless pretty much left here about 2 days before the store closed. There really was nothing over there. Before the store closed, cars went out and picked up the trash. Now, they had been very proactive on going out on a daily basis and collecting the trash. I would see store employees with a trash can and a dustpan and broom out there keeping the perimeter, keeping around the store swept up. It was a constant. It never stopped. So they kept it clean as much as they could. The homeless would hang out around the building. They would beg for food. They'd beg for money. I had situations where I would walk by a homeless person and they'd just smile at me and I'd smile at them. I'd walk in the store and unbeknownst to me, they were following me around the store, and I didn't realize that until I got to the checkout stand and I turned around and they'd be standing there. The homeless continued to come into the store even though they had been told they could not come back. They would keep coming in the store. They knew them by names. They'd go up and tell them they needed to leave. They were very polite about it. Other times they'd be very firm. But they would tell them you had to leave. So they would not let them, once they caught them. There was only one time that I ever saw the police show up. And that was about 2 years ago when I heard sirens wailing, and I went and looked outside. There were 3 cop cars and they had a lady in handcuffs. She was screaming and crying, and they were throwing her in the back of the car, and I recognized it as Brandy. So I knew that more than likely Brandy had she just never would leave the property. Brandy was the only person. They could run everybody else off and they keep coming back, but the characters would change off and on, but Brandy was constant. They'd tell Brandy, you need to go. So she'd leave, and she'd actually cross over here to this part of the property, wait until they disappeared, and then she'd go back and sit on the stairs. Brandy, for 19 years, was out in this area. I asked the people about her. They told me that there were people that had tried to take Brandy into their home, but because of her alcoholism, it didn't work. So Brandy, as far as I know, was an alcoholic, and I also was told she would do anything for cigarettes. And I saw Brandy many, many times get into people come up and talk to her, and she'd just get in the car with them. She'd show up the next day, but that was a pretty common practice with Brandy, sometime almost every night. When she would get really drunk, she would scream and cry. For many years, Brandy was a really happy person. She would laugh, she'd smile, she waved at everybody who walked by, everybody called her. She just laughed and smiled. And the people out here were really good to the homeless. They would give them money, they would give them food, they would give them beverages. In the wintertime, they'd give them coats and blankets. And Brandy was one of the faces of the people out here that everybody knew by name. People gave her cigarettes, they gave her food. There were many people who live in this building that would actually take food out to her every day. There was someone, I don't know who, and I saw it for 2 years. For 2 years, somebody would drive up to those stairs where Brandy was sitting in the evening and would give her a restaurant-type meal that was in a styrofoam container and drive off. So for 19 years, across the street, this homeless lady who was in the videos that I posted before this one, and her name was Brandy. She was a native lady, and she lived on those stairs. That was her home for 19 years. In the wintertime, she would vanish when it got cold, but that was pretty common for the homeless around here when it got really cold, because there are places here that the city will actually open in the wintertime when it gets really cold. They will make sure there is a place for them where the 200 and 300 homeless people, when it gets down to 20, 30, 0, 10 below, they have to put up a place for them. So they always did. We always had a place for them to go. So Brandy and a lot of these homeless you wouldn't see them as much in the wintertime. But in the summertime, they'd come back. So for 19 years, Brandy lived over there on those stairs. And then about a year ago, after we had a really cold winter, she vanished. We thought she had succumbed to the elements. I thought maybe she'd gone back to one of her villages. And so nobody really knew what happened to Brandy, but today is the first day I saw Brandy. And I was looking out the window, and there have been no homeless out here for weeks. It's been very quiet. There's been no screaming, no yelling, no drug activity, no prostitution, no guns going off. There's no cars driving by with loud music. The only people that walk outside are people that live in this area, generally walking back and forth to get to the bus stop that's close by. There's just no homeless out here anymore. They just completely are gone. And I looked out the window and I saw this woman standing there by a fence on crutches. And it was apparent that she probably only had one leg. And she was standing there for quite some time. So I knew that more than likely this was somebody that was not aware the store had closed. And I also knew that more than likely they had come out here thinking they could sit on the stairs. And this store over here was a big social place for the homeless too. And I I talk about some of the negative things that I saw, but there were a lot of, you know, homeless people that were very nice, very polite. And Brandy was one of them. And the thing that I really liked about Brandy for the first few years I was out here is Brandy was always friendly, always smiling, always laughing. She never begged for money. She never begged for food. She would just sit on those stairs, wave at everybody. If you walked by, she'd say hello. She was just very friendly, and everybody here knew her by name. And they pretty much, the people who live out here took care of her. They provided food, they provided water. And then after she got arrested, I thought she'd be gone for a while. But she was back the next day. But she was never the same. So for the last 2 years, I watched Brandy just sit over there on those stairs crying. Anyone who tried to talk to her, and it didn't just include anybody in the community that lived here, any of the homeless that would try to befriend her, she would scream and yell at them. She'd get up and pace around screaming and yelling, and it was kind of heartbreaking. Occasionally people would say, Brandy, they'd come out here from the building and say, Brandy, if I give you some cigarettes, if I give you something to eat or drink, will you stop screaming? And she'd say yes. And we'd give her food, we'd give her something to eat, but then she'd be back to screaming again and yelling. It was constant. So she'd vanished, but today is the first day that she was back here. And after watching for about 10 minutes where this woman was not moving at all, I just grabbed my folding chair that I'd had up here for about a year. And I went down there, and as soon as I turned around the corner and I saw her, I heard her crying before I came up there. And she was crying and screaming. And she was screaming at me when I walked up to her. And she had urinated all over herself. And I recognized it was Brandy. And so, more than likely, somehow last year she lost a leg. She's probably been in the Native hospital. So I unfolded the chair and I told her it was hers. She screamed at me, told me to shut up and leave. And I left. But after I left, she sat in the chair. And then later, if you watch the video, the security came and made her leave. I did watch off and on, and they had taken the chair and put it across the street. She moved it. She walked away for a little bit on her crutches, and some guy came by on a bicycle, saw the folding chair, went over to it, and I noticed that Brandy came back up, and he continued to fold up the folding chair and was putting it in his sleeve, and I ran out of the building. And sure enough, this young man on a bicycle had taken that folding chair, even though Brandy came back over there on her crutches as fast as she could. And he had folded up the chair and put it back in the sleeve. He had slung it over his shoulder and was riding off on his bicycle with it over his shoulder. And Brandy was walking as fast as she could on those crutches. And I went out and screamed at him, and he stopped. And I told him to give it back to her. It belonged to her. And then he's yelling at me. I didn't know. And I said, she came up to you. She's on crutches with one leg. Give her back the chair. He told me I didn't know, and he wouldn't give her back the chair. Anyway, that's what Uh, I started filming when I came out here because I'd never seen anything like this. And I don't know if there will be anything else that goes on outside here. But I thought, out of consideration to those of you that have watched this channel, and I never intended to do this, I just actually started filming these because I was sending them to my family because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I found out, because I'm so computer illiterate, I found out that you can't send a 5-minute video on a message. So I just started filming on YouTube simply because I could send these videos to my family and say, you won't believe this. And so the channel was simply started as a way to record what I was seeing so I could send it to people that I knew and say, I don't believe what's going on out here. This is insane. So this channel was never started as a way to just start a channel to do something. It was just a way for me to record what was going on to send it to people that I knew. Anyway, there is something I've been thinking about doing with this channel. But let me think about it a little bit more. I know those of you that have been watching it are probably because you're interested in the homeless. And if you've seen these videos, I'm just hoping it's made you more aware of excuse me, of the homeless and the people that are out there. There are a lot of horrible things I saw, but there were a lot of extremely sad things too. I wish there was more that I could do other than film. Anyway, I want to thank you for watching the videos, and let me think about what I'm going to do with this channel. But anyway, that's what's going on. The store is closed. The homeless are gone. Brandy was the first one out here today in probably weeks. There really is not anything going on. This has become a very quiet, deserted, normal neighborhood now, which has been extremely nice. But thank you so much for watching these videos. And I will probably upload another one in a week because I have something in mind. So take care. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to like this video, you can. It's not necessary. If you want to subscribe, you can. I don't know if that's necessary. But thank you so much, and God bless you.